Carl Jung identified a perceptual architecture so rare most of psychology refuses to name it. Most who call themselves empaths are describing an emotional condition. They absorb, they mirror, but a rare few possess something that has nothing to do with emotion, a clarity so accurate the people closest to them have spent years trying to discredit it. If you are watching this, there is a real possibility you've been using the wrong word for what you carry your entire life. The pop psychology definition was the closest label the culture could give you, but it was never the right one. The right one is older. It comes from the Gnostic tradition that Jung studied for the last 30 years of his life. And by the end of this video, you will have a precise clinical framework to determine whether you were born with this specific architecture. You will understand why the word empath was always a flawed translation, and you will finally have the correct name for what you actually are. You walk into a room and you do not just feel the mood, you read the unspoken reality of the power dynamics before anyone has spoken a single word. You understand the buried psychology of the people around you, often better than they understand themselves, and you assume this was anxiety. You assumed it was a side effect of hypervigilance. You assumed everyone processed the world at this depth and simply chose not to talk about it. They do not. And that realization is where this video begins. You spent your life thinking you were overly sensitive, when in reality, you were simply the only person in the room with your eyes open. People come to you with their drama. They sit across from you at the kitchen table, or in the passenger seat of your car, or on the other end of a phone call that was supposed to last 5 minutes and is now approaching its second hour. They pour out their grief, their confusion, their anger at the person who wronged them, and they expect you to weep with them. They expect the standard empathic response: mirroring, absorption, emotional co-regulation, but that is not what happens inside you. Instead of getting swept into their emotional storm, you feel a strange, detached clarity descend over your perception, like a lens clicking into focus. You do not feel their sorrow. You see the exact psychological lie they are telling themselves to generate that sorrow. You see the pattern they have been running for 15 years. You see the way they are describing a situation that conveniently omits the part where they created it. And you see all of this in the first 90 seconds of the conversation, before they have even finished their opening monologue. Jung described this mechanism in a 1957 interview with a precision that should have ended the empath debate decades ago. He said the intuitive is a type that doesn't see the stumbling block before his feet, but he smells a rat for 10 miles. Read that again. He did not say the intuitive feels what others feel. He said the intuitive smells the rat, the deception, the hidden motive, the thing everyone present has agreed not to see. Your perception skips the surface emotion entirely. It bypasses the performance and penetrates straight to the raw truth underneath. You are not a sponge. You are an involuntary diagnostician. Your gift was never warmth. Your gift was, and has always been, an almost clinical accuracy that makes the people around you feel like you are reading their medical chart while they are trying to have a casual conversation. And this is the reason you have felt cold. Not emotionally cold, perceptually cold. You have sat across from someone in genuine pain and noticed that instead of drowning in their tears, you were calmly, almost surgically identifying the exact fault line in their thinking that created the pain in the first place, and you felt guilty about it. You assumed something was wrong with you, that a real empath would cry with them instead of quietly cataloging their blind spots. Nothing is wrong with you. You were simply operating a different instrument than the one the culture told you to play. If you have ever been in a room where someone was acting perfectly kind, perfectly reasonable, perfectly generous, and your internal alarm system was screaming at a frequency only you could hear, and you could not explain how you knew they were lying, but you knew it with granite certainty. If that has been the shape of your social life for as long as you can remember, write this in the comments. I was never feeling, I was seeing. Because the reason you process information this way has nothing to do with how you were raised. The self-help industry has a convenient explanation for what you carry. Childhood trauma, hypervigilance, an anxious attachment style developed in response to an unpredictable caregiver. And some of that may be true. You have trauma. Most people who process at your depth do, but you quietly know something the self-help framework refuses to acknowledge. Your processing speed was there before the pain. You did not become this way because of what happened to you. What happened to you happened in part because you were already this way. You were the child who noticed, the child who registered, the child whose nervous system was already cataloging the emotional weather of every space before anyone taught you that weather was something worth watching. Jung insisted on this with a force that bordered on anger. He wrote that the psyche is by no means a tabula rasa. We are a definite mixture and combination of genes, and they are there from the very first moment of our life, and they give a definite character even to the little child. A blank slate. That is what the behavioral psychologists wanted the human mind to be, a surface that experience writes upon, infinitely malleable, shaped entirely by environment. Jung rejected this with the full weight of 40 years of clinical evidence. You were not written upon. You arrived already written. The way you process reality was encoded in the wiring of your brain from the first cellular division, and no amount of therapy, medication, or mindfulness practice will uninstall it. Because it is not software, it is hardware, and modern neuroscience has proven him right. Dario Nardi, a neuroscientist who spent years mapping brain activity across personality types, discovered something that would have made Jung's argument for him. He found that certain intuitive brains possess what he called a superhighway, a neural pathway so developed, so structurally dominant, that it processes information at a speed and complexity that other brain types simply cannot replicate. He described it this way: it's almost like the person must have some kind of a superhighway built in. But the superhighway does not just process faster, it processes differently. Nardi identified a specific cognitive function he called transcontextual thinking, the ability to see patterns and relationships in one situation and match those to many other seemingly very different situations. Your brain does not take a single piece of information and file it in a single category. It takes a single piece of information and simultaneously maps it across every context you have ever encountered. A friend says one sentence about their morning, and your mind has already cross-referenced it against their behavioral patterns from the last 3 years, their relationship dynamics, their childhood wounds, and the lie they told you about being fine last Tuesday. You cannot take anything at face value, not because you choose not to, because the superhighway will not allow it. Your brain insists on seeing the entire web. And this is why casual conversation exhausts you in a way that baffles the people around you. Small talk drains you not because you are introverted, though you may be, but because while they are talking about the weather, your brain is analyzing the psychological insecurity driving their tone of voice, the unresolved conflict they are avoiding by filling the air with noise, and the specific way their body language contradicts every word coming out of their mouth. You were born with an engine that processes reality at a frequency the people around you cannot hear. And the relief in that sentence, if you are feeling it right now, is not vanity. It is the sound of a structural truth finally being named. You were not traumatized into sensitivity. You were built this way. And the exhaustion you carry is not a sign that something is broken. It is the operational cost of running a machine that was engineered for a depth of processing the world has not yet learned to accommodate. However, being born with this superhighway guarantees a very specific, agonizing experience in childhood. When you put a Sophia nervous system into a standard family unit, the child does not get to be a child. You look back at your childhood, and there is a moment that sits in your memory like a photograph taken from an angle no one else in the family could have held. You were 8 or 9 years old. You looked at your mother or your father or the person who was supposed to be the adult, and you understood them. Not in the way a child admires or fears or loves a parent. You understood the blueprint of their wound. You saw the hidden insecurity driving their anger. You saw the unlived dream curdling into resentment underneath their daily performance of contentment. You saw the marriage as a structure, the silence between them as a language, the arguments as a script both of them were reading from without knowing the author. You did not have the vocabulary for any of this. You were 9. You did not know the word projection. You did not know the word shadow. But you knew what your mother was hiding from herself with the same certainty you knew your own name. And you carried that knowledge in absolute silence, because even at 9, your superhighway had already calculated that naming what you saw would make you the problem. Jung understood what happens to the intuitive child in this environment. The child possesses an unfiltered awareness of what he called the participation mystique, the unconscious fusion that operates between family members who have never examined their own psychology. The parent suppresses their shadow. The child reads the shadow. The parent hides from their unlived life. The child absorbs the weight of that unlived life as if it were furniture in a room they can see but no one else acknowledges exists. You became the translator, not by choice, by architectural inevitability. Your mind was the most sensitive instrument in the household, and the household was generating signals that someone had to process. So you processed them. You decoded your father's withdrawal as grief he had never been permitted to feel. You decoded your mother's controlling behavior as terror masquerading as love. You decoded the family dynamics with a precision that would have impressed a seasoned therapist, and you were in the 4th grade. And no one thanked you for this labor. No one acknowledged it. No one even knew it was happening, because the translation was invisible. You processed the household's unmetabolized psychological material the way a kidney processes toxins, silently, automatically, without anyone understanding that the organ doing the work was being damaged by the volume of what it was required to filter. You became tired in a way other children were not tired, not physically exhausted, existentially old. You had seen too much of the machinery behind the curtain, and you could not unsee it, and you could not explain to anyone what you were carrying because the adults around you did not possess the perceptual equipment to understand the report. You never got to be naive. You never got to be small. You were born with a radar calibrated for depths that a child's life should never require, and your family handed you the entire ocean on your first day. If you are recognizing yourself in this pattern, if you were the child who understood the adults better than they understood themselves and have been carrying that invisible labor ever since, and you are realizing for the first time that the weight was never yours to hold. The alchemist's path was written for exactly this moment. Jung-based boundary drills, perception training for empaths, and 3 exclusive chapter videos that turn that recognition into a practice you can use. 236 pages, downloadable now at thesurrealmind.com, because carrying this exact same radar into adulthood creates a terrifying dynamic in your friendships and relationships. You notice a dynamic at work, in a friend group, at a family gathering, a subtle toxicity that everyone else has agreed to overlook because naming it would disrupt the social contract holding the group together, a passive-aggressive pattern that has been operating for months, a manipulation so normalized that the group has built its entire communication structure around accommodating it, and you name it, not aggressively, not from a place of superiority. You simply describe what is happening, the way you would describe the weather, calmly, precisely, without venom. The room freezes. Nobody addresses the substance of what you said. Nobody explains why you are wrong. Because you are not wrong, and on some level they know it, so they redirect. The accusation shifts from what you observed to who you are. Too intense, exhausting, always reading into things, always making everything complicated. The content of your insight disappears entirely, and what remains is a character trial you never agreed to stand for. Jung understood why this happens with a clinical detachment that borders on beautiful. He wrote that every individual is surrounded by a layer he called the persona, the mask the individual presents to the world in order to secure the goodwill of society. When the persona is threatened, when someone in the group forces the others to see the gap between who they pretend to be and who they actually are, the group does not thank the mirror. The group punishes it. You are a walking mirror for the collective shadow. When you speak the truth about what is operating in front of them, you are not offering an opinion. You are forcing every person present to confront the chronique scandaleuse of their own hidden motives, the private chronicle of psychological dishonesty they have been maintaining in order to function. And they cannot tolerate it, not because you are wrong, because being right in the way you are right is a profound act of psychological disruption against the denial they need in order to survive their own lives. And the punishment is never proportional to what you said. It is proportional to what they felt when you said it. You offered a single accurate observation and you received a sentence of exile. Because you did not merely point out a flaw, you threatened the survival of the identity they had cemented around themselves. And that identity, feeling itself under threat, activated every defense mechanism available to eliminate the source of the danger, which is you. You will always be a threat to people who rely on illusions to survive, not because you choose to be threatening, because your awareness, operating at the frequency your superhighway was built to maintain, cannot coexist peacefully with the denial that most social environments require as the price of admission. The people who punished you for speaking were not cruel. They were drowning, and you walked into the room breathing underwater, and the sight of you forced them to acknowledge that they had been holding their breath for years. And the pattern repeats, not once, not with one person, with every intimate relationship you have ever entered. Because the dynamic is mechanical, not personal. They are drawn to you because your clarity makes them feel seen in a way no one else can offer. And they eventually turn on you because that same clarity makes them feel exposed in a way no one else forces them to endure. The admiration and the punishment are two faces of the same coin, and the coin was minted the moment your superhighway made contact with their unexamined shadow. You have tried to prevent this. You have learned to bury your observations 3 layers deep, packaging them as harmless curiosity so the other person never realizes you already have the answer. You have spent entire dinners biting through the inside of your cheek to keep from saying the thing that would collapse the evening. And none of it has worked. Because the people who rely on the performance can feel what you are withholding. They register it the way an animal registers a predator standing still. The concealment unsettles them more than the statement ever would have. Your clarity is not a social deficiency. It is the one faculty you possess that the collective will never forgive you for having. And the sooner you stop apologizing for it, the sooner you stop performing blindness in rooms that demand it, the sooner you begin the only life that was ever actually designed for a nervous system like yours. Accepting this social punishment leads you to the final realization of what you actually are. You have spent decades building a smaller version of yourself, one that fits, one that does not frighten the people it loves. You have rehearsed the performance so many times it became a second skin. The empathic listener, the gentle soul, the woman who feels too much, the man who thinks too deeply, the person who apologizes for the sharpness of their own mind as though insight were an act of aggression. You wore the costume because wearing it meant belonging, and belonging was the only currency the world offered you in exchange for your silence. But the truth has a name, and the name is older than psychology. Jung spent the last 3 decades of his life immersed in the Gnostic tradition, the ancient spiritual system that mapped the deepest layers of the psyche centuries before clinical psychology existed. And at the center of that tradition sits an archetype he returned to again and again in his letters and his lectures. He referenced the Gnostic image of Bethos and Sophia, the ancient pairing of the abyss and wisdom. Sophia, the embodiment of divine structural truth. Not emotional sympathy, not gentle understanding, absolute, piercing, unsentimental clarity about the nature of reality. You have been using the word empath because it was the only word the culture gave you. And the label served a function. It gave you permission to acknowledge that you process differently. It gave you a community of people who understood, at least partially, what it means to walk through the world with the volume turned up. But the label was always too small, too focused on feeling other people's pain, too passive, too oriented around absorption rather than sight. The word empath describes someone who is done to. Sophia describes someone who sees through. Your actual archetype is Sophia. You were not meant to be a sponge for other people's sorrow. You were meant to be an instrument of absolute piercing truth, the cold reed that sees through the performance, the involuntary translator who understood the adults before the adults understood themselves, the punished mirror that the group tried to smash because it reflected what they could not bear to see. These are not symptoms of a disorder. These are the operational signatures of the Sophia archetype living inside a body that was built, from the level of the gene, to carry it. The exhaustion you feel is not because you are too sensitive. It is the non-negotiable cost of carrying a mind that was engineered to see in the dark. The isolation you carry is not a symptom of damage. It is the inevitable consequence of operating at a depth the collective has not yet evolved to match. And the label empath, the one that always made you feel like a victim of your own feeling, was a cage built from insufficient language. Sophia does not absorb the world's pain. Sophia introduces the world to its own reality, and the world, more often than not, does not want to meet itself. You were not born to absorb, you were born to illuminate. And the only thing standing between you and the life that was designed for the way you are built is the permission you have been withholding from yourself. The permission to stop pretending you do not know what you know, to stop dimming the frequency your nervous system was built to broadcast, to stop performing the role of the wounded sensitive when you are and have always been the clearest eye in every room you have ever entered. You do not need to heal your empathy. You need to stop calling it empathy. What you carry has a name, it has an architecture, it has a lineage that stretches from the Gnostic mystics, through Jung's clinical observations, through the neuroscience that confirmed what both of them already knew. You were born with a superhighway that processes reality at a depth the culture has no infrastructure to support. You survived the childhood translation. You survived the social punishment. You survived the years of strategic blindness that nearly cost you yourself. And now you know what you are. Not an empath, not a highly sensitive person, not a victim of your own perception. Sophia, the one who sees. And the seeing was never the wound. The seeing was always the gift. The wound was the world's inability to hold it. If this is the first time someone has given you the precise Jungian vocabulary for what your mind has been doing your entire life, the alchemist's path takes what you recognize today and turns it into a practice. Jung-based boundary drills, perception training for empaths, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. 236 pages, downloadable now at thesurrealmind.com.